A profound silence had settled over St. Peter's Square. The usual movement, the soft chatter and the endless footsteps that typically filled the air had all faded. For that moment, it was as if the entire world had paused. Time felt slower, the air heavier. It wasn't just a regular evening in Rome, it was something much more. A crowd had gathered, coming from every corner of the world. People stood shoulder to shoulder, their eyes fixed on one single place, the balcony of St. Peter's Basilica. The expressions on their faces showed a mix of hope, curiosity, and reverence. They had come to witness history. As they waited, the centuries-old stones of the Vatican stood tall, whispering stories of the past. Statues watched silently as they had for hundreds of years. The lights cast long shadows across the square, giving everything a sense of depth and importance. Every person in that space felt the weight of the moment. Something big was about to happen, and everyone knew it. Then it began. The curtains of the central balcony began to move. Slowly, with purpose, they parted. A hush fell over the crowd, more silent than before. All eyes were locked on that one point. People held their breath, waiting to see the face of the new pope. Then, through the opening, stepped a familiar figure, Cardinal Luis Antonio Tagle. Many were surprised. He wasn't the name most people expected. But at the same time, something about him felt right. His face showed calmness, kindness, and deep understanding. He carried himself with grace, dressed in the full regalia of the new leader of the Catholic Church. A gentle smile played on his lips, humble, warm, and comforting. He looked out at the sea of faces, and though he was just one man, he seemed to connect with everyone there. Cardinal Tagle, now Pope, stood in that sacred space. A son of Asia, a humble servant from the Philippines, was now the 266th Pope of the Roman Catholic Church. His presence marked a turning point in the history of the Church. This was not just about religion, this was about inclusion, representation, and hope. A wave of emotion swept through the crowd. Whispers of his name began to travel across the square. Tagle, Pope Tagle. People spoke in wonder, some with tears in their eyes, others with smiles of hope. They knew this moment would be remembered for generations. Back in the Sistine Chapel where the decision had been made, 137 cardinals had gathered. Each of them carried the hopes and dreams of millions from their home countries. For days they had prayed, discussed, and listened to the voice of the Spirit. It was a sacred process, one that followed a tradition hundreds of years old. And Yihweh, when the decision was finally made, white smoke had risen from the chimney. It was a signal to the world. A new pope had been chosen. The choice of Pope Tagle was historic. For the first time in the long story of the Catholic Church, a man from the Philippines, an Asian from the global south, had been chosen to lead. It was more than a personal victory. It was a message to the world that the Church belongs to everyone, not just to Europe, not just to the West. It was a sign of change. Born and raised in the Philippines, Pope Tagle understood the life of ordinary people. He knew the struggles of the poor, the hopes of the working class, and the deep faith that lived in the hearts of simple families. He had walked with the marginalized. He had listened to the unheard. And now he stood at the center of the Catholic world, ready to lead with that same compassion. His election was met with celebration, not just in Rome, but across the world. In the Philippines, the reaction was overwhelming. Streets filled with cheers. Churches rang their bells. People cried with joy, hugged strangers, and raised flags. It wasn't only about national pride. It was about what he stood for: humility, compassion, and a vision for a more loving church. When he finally began to speak from the balcony, the world listened. His voice was steady and warm. He greeted the people with a message that crossed all barriers. "Peace to the world, kapayapaan sa lahat," he said, blending English and Filipino, in a way that touched hearts in every language. These were not just words, they were a promise. His message was clear. He wanted a church that welcomed everyone, not just the rich, not just the powerful, but the poor, the forgotten, the broken. He spoke of love, of unity, and of a need for kindness in a world that was growing colder each day. His dream was of a church that truly felt like home to all. He did not avoid difficult truths. He called on the church to do more for the environment. He spoke of caring for the earth, our common home. He spoke of standing up for social justice, of making sure no one was left behind. He called for peace not just within the church, but across all religions and nations. He knew the challenges were many. The modern world is complex. There is division, confusion, and pain. But his voice brought calm. He reminded everyone that faith is not found in power, but in love. Not in buildings, but in people. Not in rules, but in relationships. His call was one for spiritual renewal. He asked people to return to prayer, to silence, to stillness. He invited them to reconnect with their inner faith, to find God not just in the church, but in daily life, in kindness, in generosity, in forgiveness. And as he spoke, you could feel something shifting. People were not just hearing words, they were feeling them. His message was simple, but it reached deep. He asked everyone to be part of a journey of healing, of service, of love. His vision for the church was bold. He wanted it to go out into the streets, into the corners of society where people were suffering, forgotten, or rejected. He wanted the church to be a light in darkness, a voice for those who had none, a safe space for all. From Europe to Africa, from the Americas to Asia, churches lit candles in his honor. Religious leaders from other faiths sent messages of support. Even world leaders paused to recognize the importance of what had just happened. A new leader had emerged, not with grand speeches or bold promises, but with a heart full of love. In the Philippines, the feeling was especially strong. The pride was not just national, it was deeply spiritual. For generations, the Philippines had been one of the most deeply Catholic nations in the world. Now one of their own was at the heart of that world. People danced in the streets, prayed in churches, and gathered in homes to watch every second of his appearance. As the sun began to set over Rome, casting a golden light across the square, the atmosphere changed. There was now a sense of peace, a calm after the storm of excitement. Pope Tagle had finished speaking, but his words hung in the air. They had done something important. They had planted seeds of hope, of change, of faith. This was the beginning of something new, a new pope, a new era, a new vision for a church that many had begun to lose hope in. His speech reminded the world that faith was still alive, that love could still lead, that hope could still grow. People in the crowd wiped away tears. They held hands, they hugged, they stood in silence, taking in the moment. For them, and for many watching around the world, this was not just about religion. It was about humanity, about kindness, about starting again. As the night drew in and the stars began to appear in the sky above the Vatican, the feeling was clear. Something had changed, and while it would take time to see where it all would lead, one thing was certain: Pope Tagle had given the world a moment of unity, of inspiration, and of belief. His message would continue to echo not just in churches, but in homes, schools, workplaces, and streets. Wherever people longed for peace and understanding, his words would find a place. He had reminded the world of something simple yet powerful, that we are all part of one family, and that together we can build a better future. The Vatican's walls had heard many speeches, but this one would be remembered. Not because it was loud or grand, but because it was filled with truth. It came from the heart of a man who had spent his life serving others, and now stood ready to serve the whole world. And so, as Pope Tagle turned and stepped back from the balcony, the applause that followed him was not just for the man, but for the hope he had awakened. The church had taken a new path, one filled with compassion, diversity, and unity. The future was uncertain, as it always is, but the light had, as the world continued to absorb the significance of Pope Tagle's appointment, the excitement didn't die down. People from all over the world began to reflect on what his election meant for the future of the Catholic Church and for the world at large. For centuries, the Church had been led by European figures, and now, with Pope Tagle, the message was loud and clear. The Catholic Church was truly a global community, embracing its diverse worldwide following. The symbolism of Pope Tagle's rise from the Philippines resonated deeply with Catholics in the global South. For many in Asia, Africa, and Latin America, His election was more than just a personal achievement. It was a reflection of the changing realities of the Church. The global South, home to a large percentage of Catholics, was finally receiving the recognition